we've run out of chairs, but if you got called Monday and sit around on those tables over there. You all want to keep over there.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. It's good to be here. What a great crowd. If I appear a little bit dizzy, it's not that I've been drinking, but I came up Highway 55, and it was my decision. I said, let's don't go through Louisville, because we'll hit all the work traffic. And on the map, 55 looks a lot straighter. So I'm a little bit dizzy from my driver, but we did make it almost on time. We're glad to be here. I'm a physician. I'm an eye surgeon down in Bowling Green. I've had a busy day today. I got up early this morning and did surgery at our local hospital. The primary surgery I do is eye surgery. Cataract surgery is the most common. And so I did surgery this morning at the hospital, saw patients, and then got up and got in the car and tried to get here on time. People sometimes ask me, they say, well, why would you want to go from a profession that's fairly well respected to a profession that has a very little respect? And that's a good question. And I don't think I would do it if I were just looking for another job, or if I were looking for accolades, or just looking for something for myself. I do it because I'm worried about our country. What I see coming is not good. What I see that's been happening in the last few years is not good. I think that we are drowning in a sea of debt, and we have to change directions. There's a promise I made. I'm married and I have 3 children, but I had to promise my wife something when I decided to run. She says, you must promise that you'll never sing. She started singing. And I have kept to that promise, but I do like music, and there is one lyric from a band called Rush, and it's, glittering prizes and endless compromises shatter the illusion of integrity. And I think that represents a lot of what's going on in our country. I see the glittering prizes as the pork barrel spending, the earmarks, the things I can grab for you if you want to send me as your errand boy or an errand girl to Washington to grab you some more projects so we can get something built in Shelbyville for $10 million, a new big building for you. That would be great if there was any money in Washington. The only money in Washington came from here in Shelbyville, and actually there's not enough to bring back because we're spending $1.75 trillion more than comes in. The illusion is that you can become wealthy as a country by borrowing money from overseas and then spending it on capital projects or big buildings in your community. You can spend money if you have it, and we can spend the $2.4 trillion we bring in, but we shouldn't be spending $4 trillion when we only bring in $2.4 trillion. We all know that in our personal budget, but Washington's doing it. It's an illusion. If you look at Rome in the latter days of Rome, as Rome was failing, how did they placate the mob? Bread and circuses, food and entertainment. What do we give the people now? How are you supposed to be placated? Cash for clunkers and your stimulus check. What do they tell you? What's the logic from Washington? What do they tell you to do? Just go to the mall. Everything will be okay. Take your check and go to the mall. What kind of economic plan is that, to go to the mall? And where does the money come from? $4,500 for cash for clunkers. Where did the money come from? We can either tax you for it, but we're not taxing enough. I don't want more taxes, but we aren't taxing enough to pay for the debt. We can borrow it, but we're borrowed to the hilt. We owe the Chinese $800 billion. We owe the Japanese $700 billion, the Saudis $100 billion, the Taiwanese $100 billion. The list goes on and on. Where we were once a great country that manufactured things and exported to the world our wares, you know what our #1 export is now? The debt. We sell our debt to foreigners, but they're getting tired of buying it. Even the foreigners have finally said, enough's enough. And you see the Chinese becoming less hesitant to buy our debt. The Chinese have begun buying gold. People say, you know, the gold, should you buy gold as an investment? I tell people now, and I'm not a financial advisor, but I tell them, you know what? There's a Chinese floor under gold right now. Every time it dips, the Chinese buy. I don't see it going below $900, and I fear it goes a lot higher if the dollar becomes closer and closer to a problem internationally. Over half of our currency is overseas. Over half of US dollars are overseas. What happens if there's a crisis of failure? The only reason they use our dollars now is because our paper currency is a little bit better off than the rest of the world's paper currencies. But how long can a country live on borrowed wealth? I'm fond of the saying that those who live beyond their means will live beneath their means. I think that for a generation we've been consuming the wealth of this country, and we are getting dangerously close to a time when we will have to pay for this. Many people say, you will pay for the debt, your grandchildren, your children will, and I think that's true. But I think the problem is more imminent than that. I think the problem may be around the corner through higher prices and the destruction of the dollar. When I was a kid in 1979, I remember I had just gotten my driver's license a little before that, and I remember the gas lines and the price of everything rising, and inflation was 20%. Many of you will remember that. Interest rates were almost 20% as well. I think we're going to get 1979 on steroids. And the reason I think so is that when we had this big banking panic last year, they doubled the monetary base. This is something the Federal Reserve did. When the monetary base is doubled, it goes into the banking system, but then it can be multiplied another tenfold through fractional reserve system because the banks only have to keep 10% on hand. So if this money gets multiplied, this is a historic amount of money that's been pumped into the system. If you look, there's a Federal Reserve chart. We actually reprinted it. Some of you may have gotten this letter from us. If you look at the monetary base over the last 60 years, it's kind of doing this. If you look at the last 4 months of last year, it does straight up, exponentially. What is that going to mean? Bernanke says, oh, we have an exit strategy. We have a way of drawing all that money out of the economy. But here's the rub. They will take money out of the economy if they have a boom, economic growth. Let's say they have 4 or 5% growth and they get inflation, 10 or 15% inflation. They can quell the inflation by taking the money out. But what do you do if you have 0% growth, still high unemployment like we have, and yet you get inflation? So what do we do if there's 15 or 20% inflation next year but no economic growth? Their exit strategy won't work because they won't retract the money, and then it could be a spiraling phenomenon. People say, oh, this could never happen. Those who study history can remember in 1923 in Germany, the Weimar Republic destroyed their currency. People walked around with their money in wheelbarrows to buy a loaf of bread. Workers demanded to be paid at noon because by 5 o'clock the money was worth half as much. Is it going to be that bad? I don't know. But is the debt becoming unmanageable? Is it too large? I think there's no question. The deficit next year will be 13% of the gross national product. This is a historic high. Federal spending is at 28% of gross national product, and historic high. Only a few years ago, we were spending about 20%. So we've gone from 20 to 28% in just a few years. We are spending money at $53,000 a second. It is out of control. And people say, well, how are you any different than any other Republican? I am different because I will tell you flat out, I will not vote for any budget that's not balanced, Republican or Democrat. And it's going to take someone who will stand up and do that, or we will never change. Every appropriation bill that comes before me, if I were elected, I will introduce an amendment that says, look, we're 20% over budget. We're going to cut this appropriation bill today by 20%. And people say, oh, that's impractical, you won't win. We won't win at first, but at least maybe we'll regain our believability as a party that we do believe in balanced budget. I think you're going to have a rule because I think you cannot trust the politicians. The first rule I'd have would be term limits. Let's bring them home. I think there's no reason why 2 6-year terms in the Senate is not enough, or 6 2-year terms in the House. I think that's plenty of time, and I think term limits is the way to get some changeover and to get new people into the system. I think we also need rules like balancing the budget. In Kentucky, Republicans and Democrats bicker back and forth, but in the final analysis, the budget has to be balanced by statute. If you had that in Washington, I might not even find the need to even run. It's a lot of work to leave my family and my kids and to travel at night to do this. I do it because I'm worried about our fiscal house and how it's so far out of order. But if we had a rule that said they had to balance the budget, there would be less incentive for me to even run. But we need that. I think if we don't, we are in dangerous times and that the problems are imminently upon us. With health care, I have gotten some attention on health care as a physician. I've been on the Glenn Beck several times, Glenn Beck show, both radio and television, as well as Neil Cavuto, talking about health care. I think with health care, we have to ask the primary question, is the problem in health care too much government or too little government? Too much capitalism or too little capitalism? Everybody in Washington, all the Democrats and some of the Republicans, think that the problem is capitalism has failed. So we